Hey everybody, Ryan F here, and today we are talking about something that I'm pretty excited for, and I hope all of you are excited as well. That is the Teppen World Championship 2020. It is taking place very soon. Day 1 is going to be December 18th, and Day 2 is December 26th. This video is going to be all about what decks I think the players are going to be bringing to the tournament, and what decks I think are going to perform very well. The format is each round is best out of 3. Each player brings 3 decks to the table, and each round they play 2 of those decks. And in the best out of 3, if you win with deck number 1, you have to then switch to deck number 2 and win with that. So what I'm going to be doing in this video is talk about the 3 decks that I think will do the best, or kind of sort of what I would bring to the table if I was one of the competitors. So let's get right into it. Before we talk about deck number 1, I do want to preference all this with these are just my thoughts and what I think will be doing good, and also these deck lists that I will show off are not the end-all be-all, right? The 32 players have probably spent so much time and energy over nitpicking every single card in their deck. So I'm sure even if someone brings an archetype that I'm talking about, their deck will probably be different because it's the whole metagame of a tournament, and that's what's really exciting to see. With that being said, deck number 1 that I think will do very good at the tournament is Akuma Raging Demon. We've seen this being a powerhouse in this meta week after week after week. And why is that? It's because Raging Demon as a hero power is so good because it's removal on a hero power. Also, it pumps up your ascend units, and that is what this deck plays. This deck plays efficient ascend units that either do something when they enter the battlefield or when they die, such as Zombie and Uni. You know, when they die, you get plus MP, or Ashford, when it dies, it destroys something. And then you're just playing tons of ways to destroy stuff, have it be Fate of the Unworthy, or other removal spells like Rebel's Memory and Cruel Game, or on a stick like Ashford of just more and more removal spell. And all this is so efficient. And one of the big strengths of this deck is, like I said, efficient units, ways to interact with what your opponent's doing left and right, and this deck can go long. And that is why Selfless Predation is a 3 of in this deck, because the matches can go very long. You can lose a lot of life because sometimes your opponent's just extremely aggressive, but Selfless Predation on a zombie, okay, gain some life, gain some MP, we can keep going. And speaking about zombie, you have a lot of revenge units that is that recursion over and over and over again, so you can go long. Even though this deck is extremely powerful, it can lose, and a big way that it can lose is a lot of its units are somewhat small and sometimes can trade down. Like a zombie is a very good unit. I keep on talking about this guy. However, against some red decks, you know, a BB Hood just kills this zombie outright, and then you have to wait to draw it over. So this can trade down sometimes. However, that's not the end-all be-all, but it is something to note. Also, another way that this deck can lose is if the opponent is doing something extremely fast. Yeah, right? This deck can go long, but it can lose kind of fast because it kind of wants to set up these pieces of trading a False Throne and playing a zombie and all these. But man, if your opponent just plays a very agility or a hasty threat, the game can be over kind of fast, and sometimes Akuma can't really find its footing. Up next, we have the newest hero coming to Teppen. It's Amaterasu, Great Divine Intervention. Ever since Amaterasu came out, she has been a big player in this meta, and mostly because Great Divine Intervention, this hero power is so strong. It does so much work. It gives plus 2 HP to all your units. It deals 3 damage to all your opponent's units, and it stifles all death triggers. That is so much stuff wrapped up into one hero power that it's so good. It's fantastic, and it fits with what Red really wants to do, because the package right now is all these growth units that, you know, become bigger or get agility or deal damage, and you're racking up the growth points to get a big Grizzle Veteran or to make Rashid be able to deal a lot of damage with a friendly feud, and all that stuff is so efficient. And what a big strength of this deck is efficiency plus redundancy. Redundancy in this type of deck is key because a lot of your stuff is kind of interchangeable. It's like, okay, like if you have Dog, Dog, Rashid, or, Dog, Dog, Chill, Penguin, all those openers of 10 MP are so strong that it doesn't really matter. So this is such a good deck because a lot of your hands will do very powerful things because you're playing redundancy of powerful effects. Even though this deck is so powerful, so efficient, so redundant, there are ways to beat it. Raging Demon is kind of one of them because all of your threats, most all of them, will just straight up die to a Fate of the Unworthy or a lot of Murderous Spikes or something like that. Your units are fragile. However, they do pile up on top of each other, so therefore, if your opponent does kill one thing, well, you'll probably have another threat. Also, very aggressive decks or decks with high HP, like a Big Resonate style deck. Big Resonate could kind of be aggressive, and also they could get their Ibukis with tons of HP, and that can really, really be hard for this deck to deal with because you're doing, 3, 4, 5 points of damage spread across the board, and Ibuki or any other, big green unit or something like that could kind of get out of range kind of fast, and then you're just kind of like crossing your fingers to hope to get a Liberation Slash, and it's usually slash or bust at that time. The last deck that I want to talk about is one that I got from a viewer of my stream called Schmo7707. They did very good with Nero with this deck in November. They actually broke the top 100, I believe, and was the #1 Nero. This is a Nero Devil Breaker. The strengths of this deck is it's humans, right? It's humans, so it's played on human synergies with Bombast and other things like that. A lot of your stuff is super, super aggressive. Karen's, you have a lot of 3 MP plays, so Karen's just racking up these shields left and right, and then you're, getting some combo, dealing damage around. This is an aggressive deck with a lot of units and a lot of ways to either get them from your deck with Bombast or get them back from the graveyard with Defect. And stuff like Chris is great because it's a 2-for-1, right? You play Chris, he brings a friend, and all of his friends are very powerful because you're playing so many humans. Another big strength of this deck is using the Hero Art Devil Breaker. This Hero Art does so much work for this deck because it does 2 things. It's +3 attack and spillover, and yes, it might only be effective for 1 turn, but sometimes that's all you need. If your opponent is at 5 life and you have a Karen, all you need to do is, if Karen's in an empty lane, you just use your Devil Breaker. Well, Karen becomes 5, and if they're at 5, GG's, you win. Or if it's kind of this give and take, this really back and forth Teppen match that you have going on, you drop something in the middle lane, and let's say your opponent has tons of stuff on their board, spillover goes a long way in the middle lane, and it could just explode what your opponent is doing. So yes, Devil Breaker does only affect 1 turn, but man, the fact that it could have just on the game in general makes this a great hero art for this deck. Even though this deck is very, very powerful, there are some downsides. It is a 2-color deck, so that means you can only net 5 MP. And sometimes that makes you play in a little bit awkward of a way because especially against like Amaterasu, where usually the wolf likes to build up 10 MP and then drop, a 3-drop, 3-drop, 4-drop to explode your board. Well, you can't do the same thing, right? You kind of have to play a 3-drop, wait a little bit, play another 3-drop, and then maybe Amaterasu can kind of deal with your units when it's 1 against 1, and that can feel bad. Also, another thing is this deck likes to snowball, right? Once it gets an advantage, it's great at pushing that advantage further and further and further, and that's how it wins. However, if your opponent has tons of removal, which this is very weak to, right? Most all removal kills your stuff outright, or red damage dealing effects kills your stuff outright. If your opponent keeps on answering your threats, and that snowball, you can't really get that snowball going, is very hard to come from behind with this deck because this is a deck that is snowballing. Also, all your cards are good, but they want to swarm the board, and if your opponent keeps on answering what you're doing, it can be hard to come back from. Those are my pick for the top 3 decks that I think will be doing very, very good in Worlds 2020. However, I'm really, really excited to see what players do good and what decks are doing the best, because yes, I think these 3 decks are very good, but man, is there just room to metagame, because it's maybe maybe or we'll see a lot of Ouroboros because that has some really good matchups in this meta, or a big res, which it has some really good matchups, really bad matchups. But if you kind of have a good metagame call and then build a big res style deck towards that metagame, you can really catch people off guard and just win because of that. So I'm really excited and I cannot wait to see what the competitors bring to the table. But thank you all for watching, and I'll see you all next time.